York State Racing New York State Racing Parimutuel Wagering and Breeding Law, Section 102, provides that the New York State Gaming Commission shall consist of 7 members appointed by the governor, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. 4 members confirmed by the New York State Senate are necessary to afford the commission an ability to establish a quorum and undertake action. This present meeting of the commission is now called to order. This meeting is being conducted by video conferencing in 2 locations, New York and Schenectady. Both locations have been appropriately noticed and accommodate public attendance. Ms. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
John Crotty.
Here.
Peter Machete.
Here.
Brian O'Dwyer.
Present.
Christopher Riano. Marissa Shorenstein. Jerry Skurnick.
Here.
Ms. Secretary, please have the record reflect that a quorum of qualified members is present, thus enabling the transaction of business. Please note that Commissioner Machete is in Schenectady. Bilateral visual and oral communications between the 2 meeting locations has been established. Mr. Chairman.
Minutes of the commission meeting conducted on February 27, 2023 have been provided to the members in advance. At this time, I'd like to ask the members if there are any edits, corrections, or comments. Hearing none, Ms. Secretary, please let the record reflect the minutes were accepted. I now call upon our Executive Director to give a report of his activities since the last meeting.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Williams.
As previously discussed, the governor's executive budget was introduced on February 1st, 2023. The legislation and appropriations materials have been previously circulated to each commissioner. Since we last met, both the New York State Senate and the New York State Assembly have issued their one-house resolutions regarding fiscal year 2023-24 budget. At the chairman's request, I'll provide an overview of each house's position on the gaming aspects of the governor's proposal. There are 5 executive proposals within Article 7 revenue bills. Part X would amend the tax law in relation to requiring the New York Racing Association to enter into an agreement with the state of New York for the repayment of funds provided the state for the renovation of Belmont Park. The Assembly modified the executive proposal to authorize NYRA's $455 million Belmont redevelopment project, but requiring that the project be taken up pursuant to a project labor agreement and removing requirements of Aqueduct Racetrack closing following the completion of the redevelopment project. The Senate modified the executive proposal by adding provisions ensuring that the specific commitments for renovations are undertaken, clarifying the Franchise Oversight Board and the Division of Budget's oversight of the agreement, providing for labor protections including MWBE and service-disabled veteran protections, and requiring an affordable housing component on the aqueduct land once NYRA vacates the property. Part Y would have amended the tax law in relation to Keno-style lottery games. Specifically, it would remove the restrictions on where lottery game quick draw could be played. The Assembly rejected the proposal while the Senate modified, accepting the portion of the executive proposal that would eliminate the minimum 2,500 square foot threshold for facilities offering quick draw, but omitting the executive proposal to permit those under the age of 21 to play quick draw in establishments offering alcohol. Part Z would amend the Racing Parimutuel Wagering and Breeding Law in relation to the operations of off-track betting corporations, specifically requiring the closure of Catskill Off-Track Betting Corporation. The executive proposal would also allow Catskill participating counties to migrate to differing regional corporations. Both the Assembly and the Senate rejected this proposal. Part AA would amend the Racing Parimutuel Wagering and Breeding Law in relation to the utilization of funds in the Capital Region Off-Track Betting Corporation's Capital Acquisition Funds account. Both the Senate and the Assembly modified the executive proposal to extend, for 1 year, the authorized use of the Capital Acquisition Funds to include Catskill Off-Track Regional Off-Track Betting Corporation. And the final part of the governor's revenue proposal is Part BB, which would amend the Racing Parimutuel Wagering and Breeding Law in relation to licenses for simulcast facilities, sums related to track simulcast, simulcast of out-of-state thoroughbred races, simulcasts of races run by out-of-state harness tracks, and distribution of wagers, to amend Chapter 81 of the laws of 1994, amending the racing, parimutuel, and wagering breeding law in relation to simulcasting, to amend Chapter 346 of the laws of 1990, amending the racing, parimutuel, wagering, and breeding law in relation to simulcasting and the imposition of certain taxes in relation to extending certain provisions thereof, and to amend the racing, parimutuel, wagering, and breeding law in relation to extending certain provisions. In short, that's a bunch of extenders that are done on a year-to-year basis on laws that would otherwise be in peril of expiring during this year. Both the Assembly and the Senate have accepted the governor's proposal. In the governor's executive, transportation, economic development, and environmental conservation proposal, Part R would amend the racing, parimutuel, wagering, and breeding law, the state finance law, and the public authorities law in relation to the disposition of money from certain gaming activity, and providing for the repeal of such provisions upon the expiration thereof. Specifically, this would redirect downstate casino license and tax revenue paid by facility or facilities cited in the city of New York to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. While the Assembly accepted this proposal, the Senate modified to ensure that reoccurring casino revenues would be dedicated to public education. And finally, the Assembly rejected the executive proposal to provide $1 million for a racing impact study. As far as additions, only the Senate proposed language. The Senate proposed to amend the racing, parimutuel, wagering, and breeding law in relation to the prohibiting regional off-track betting corporations from providing items of value exceeding $15 to certain associates of the corporation, to amend the racing law in relation to prohibiting off-track betting corporation vehicles from being used as take-home vehicles, and to amend the racing law in relation to the membership of the Board of Directors of Western Regional Off-Track Betting Corporation. Meetings regarding the budget continue with the April 1st deadline on the horizon. The other item of significance I'd like to discuss today is the implementation of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority Anti-Doping and Medication Program. Today marks the start of the HISA program administration by the selected vendor, the Horse Racing Integrity and Welfare Unit, HIWU. HIWU was established last year by Drug Free Sport International, a privately held corporation based in Kansas City, Missouri, which offers drug testing and compliance services. HIWU will be undertaking the responsibility for the biologic sampling of horses competing in thoroughbred racing in New York, as well as out-of-competition testing for horses eligible to compete. HIWU and HISA will also be undertaking the testing of the sampling, evaluation of the results, and investigation and prosecution of transgressions. This transition has affected the Commission's barn staff, who have been displaced. While some staff will be continuing other employment with the Commission, and several will be engaged with HIWU as independent contractors performing similar duties, several have determined to move on. While we appreciate the efforts of all these employees, I would like to take a moment to highlight the extraordinary careers of two: Steve Feduniak and John Jones. Both employees have been with the Commission, or its predecessor agency, the Racing and Wagering Board, since the first term of the Hugh Carey administration, coming to our employment in July of 1977. Mr. Feduniak served in the position of racing inspector, while Mr. Jones served as assistant to the supervising racing veterinarian, effectively assuring appropriate chain of custody for all biologic samples drawn by the state on NYRA racetracks. A back-of-the-envelope calculation estimates that nearly 1 million samples moved through NYRA's barns during their tenure. With a collective 90 years experience, suffice to say that they have earned retirement. For all the former barn workers that have departed our employment, we offer gratitude for your dedicated service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Williams, just a question for you on that. How many samples, or what is our policy in regard to taking blood samples in a race?
As a general sense, and Ron, will you please correct me if I'm wrong, or at least supplement any answers that I provide. On the thoroughbred side, it's the winner and second place beaten favorites, and specials depending upon the determination of the steward of the presiding racetrack. So there's a minimum of 2 and a possibility of much more every single race that's conducted.
So every single race that's conducted in the state has,
Mr. Okram, did I miss anything?
No, that's correct. If it's a graded stakes, we actually take 4. Minimum.
and is it your understanding that HISA will be doing the same?
We don't know. HISA is suggesting that they're moving to intelligence-based testing, which might indicate that they have something a little bit different than taking mandatory samples at each race. This is something that I think we'll see evolve over a period of time as they acclimate to their new positions.
Okay, and our position is that, I assume our position is that we think that the most favorable way for this to be done is a sample taken in every single race. That's been our position over years.
It's been consistent probably for at least, 4 decades?
Yes.
Thank you. Any of the other commissioners have questions for the
And I
executive?
think you raise a good point. We should not accept a lesser standard if HISA is going to do this. The minimum requirement would be the same. So Rob, maybe you could tell us how many we did over, you pick whatever the chairman says, a couple period of time, last year, 2 years, 3 years, so the HISA has at least a minimum standard to be evaluated against.
Yeah, I can certainly put some numbers together relative to that.
I think it'd be
We,
helpful.
as a general sense, publish those numbers on an annualized basis in the annual report, so I can just simply pull them together and provide that collectively.
Maybe it'd be good to share with them.
No, I think I'll discuss and bring it back to the commission at our next meeting, but I think a letter from me to HISA urging them to do that is the proper way of doing it. Okay.
And it's a good point of record to go into a changed regulatory environment, right?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for that. New York State Racing Pari-Mutuel Wagering Law, Breeding Law 104.19 authorizes the Commission to promulgate rules and regulations that deems necessary to carry out its responsibility. To this regard, the Commission will, from time to time, promulgate rules and regulations and amendments to the State Administrative Procedure Act. Today, we have one rule for consideration. Mr. Williams.
For Commission consideration is a revised rule proposal to govern interactive fantasy sports. Recall in 2016, the legislature authorized certain types of interactive fantasy sports contests. New York Racing Pari-Mutuel Wagering and Breeding Law Article 14 sets forth various provisions governing interactive fantasy sports, including defining requirements for interactive fantasy sports contests, registration of interactive fantasy sports operators, required safeguards for interactive fantasy sports contestants, reporting requirements, levying of a state tax on interactive fantasy sports revenues, and the imposition of regulatory costs on operators. The law also directed the Commission to issue temporary permits only to those operators who had been offering interactive fantasy sports in New York prior to November 10th, 2015, which the Commission did. The legislature directed the Commission to, among other things, promulgate regulations to implement the provisions of and effectuate the policy and objectives of Article 14. During the development of the proposed regulations, the Commission was sued by plaintiffs alleging Article 14 violated the state constitution's general prohibition against gambling. Following the conclusion of the litigation, a notice of proposed rulemaking was published in the State Register. During the public comment period, 6 were received. 4 from Interactive Fantasy Sports temporary permittees, 1 from a trade association that purports to represent more than 150 companies offering fantasy sports contests, and 1 from a company that may wish to seek registration after the Commission adopts its regulations. Overall, there were approximately 45 suggested revisions within the public comments, and staff reviews suggest that nearly 1/3 be accepted. Many of these changes are substantial revisions, which is defined as any addition, deletion, or other change in the text of a rule proposed for adoption, which materially alters its purpose, meaning, or effect. The consequence of acceptance of substantial revisions is that a revised rulemaking must be reproposed and subject to an additional public comment period. Rather than read into the public record each of the comments received from the initial proposed rule, staff will provide a written narrative to each of the commentators illustrating whether there was acceptance or rejection of their comment and the reasons for the determination. This will allow the commentator to understand staff positioning as we enter a potential revised rulemaking public comment period. Staff recommends that the Commission repropose the interactive fantasy sports rules as amended.
Commissioners, any questions or comments on the reproposal of rules regarding interactive fantasy sports? Hearing none, may I have a motion to repropose the rule?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. The next item of scheduled business regards adjudication. Today we have two matters for adjudication. Mr. Williams.
On September 1st, 2022, State Steward Stuart Rainey at Finger Lakes Racetrack issued a notice of violation to thoroughbred owner and trainer Timothy P. Murphy for disrespecting and intimidating behavior towards a racetrack employee in the paddock before a race on August 16th, 2022, constituting action detrimental to the best interest of racing in violation of Commission Rules 4022.12 and 4022.13. Steward Rainey fined Mr. Murphy $1,000 and banned him from accessing the paddock for 1 month. After Mr. Murphy requested a hearing, the fine and paddock exclusion were stayed pending Commission determination of the matter. A hearing was conducted on January 26, 2023. The hearing officer submitted a report to the Commission Secretary dated February 20th, 2023, recommending that the Commission fine Mr. Murphy $350, but impose no suspension nor bar entry to the paddock. The Commission considered this matter at a public meeting conducted pursuant to the judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings exemption of New York Public Officers Law, Section 108.1.
The Commission duly deliberated and considered the matter and determined by a vote of 4-0 that the hearing officer's report and recommendation would be accepted and modified to this extent. In terms of the penalty, to fine Mr. Murphy $350, to suspend the fine for 12 months, and to further waive that fine after 12 months, no further infraction occurs.
Excellent. The second case is in the matter of 135th East 3rd Food Mart, Inc. On November 16th, 2022, the Bureau of Licensing issued a notice of license suspension to 135 East 3rd Food Mart, Inc., which conducts business at 135th East 3rd Street in Mount Vernon. The notice informed the Food Mart of a suspension for engaging in conduct that constitutes a fraud, deceit, misrepresentation, or conduct prejudicial to the public confidence in the state lottery. Specifically, the notice stated that the actions undertaken were because the licensee was found in possession of untaxed cigarettes. The notice also stated that the suspension would remain in effect until the disposition of the investigation by the Department of Taxation and Finance into the untaxed cigarette possession. 135th or 3rd East 3rd Food Mart requested a commission hearing, which was conducted on December 1st, 2022. On December 1st, 2022, Taxation and Finance issued a decision revoking the Food Mart's certificate of registration as a retail dealer of cigarettes and tobacco products and banning their reapplication for 1 year from the date of the violation, which was November 9th of 2022. Subsequently, the Commission conducted a hearing on February 9th, 2023, and the hearing officer submitted a report to the Commission Secretary dated March 13th, 2023, recommending that 135 East 3rd Food Mart lottery agent license be suspended for a period of 1 year beginning November 9th, 2022. The commission considered this matter at a meeting conducted pursuant to the judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings exemption of New York Public Officers Law, Section 108.1.
The commission duly deliberated and considered this matter and determined upon a 4-0 vote to sustain the hearing officer's report and recommendation. Are there any other new and old business? Before we adjourn, I just want to discuss or to bring up the fact, as Mr. Williams had indicated, there, as pursuant to my work as chair of both the Thoroughbred and Standardbred funds, there are a considerable amount of money owed to those funds by Catskill OTB. We have asked Catskill OTB to remit those funds. They have so far failed and refused and continue to fail and refuse to do. We are in the process of hiring, pursuant to state regulations, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for getting me through that morass, but of finding counsel to bring in action to recover those funds. It is substantial funds, and we expect before the next meeting that those actions will be commenced. It is something that I don't take lightly as chair of those funds, and I know the rest of the staff doesn't either. So I will keep you apprised of that at the next meeting. Hearing none, I think our next meeting is scheduled for end of next month, Mr. Williams.
Yes, ordinarily it would be the fourth Monday, which would be the 24th, April 24th.
April 24th. If I hear no other business come before the commission, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Well done, Mr. Chairman.